So this was my original intro last sem, but I wanted to have to go even deeper into like city planning, just the basics of it, like what's inside a city, what are we managing, what are we planning, besides just the idea of managing land. So this is a chart or like a diagram showing the rural and urban areas in the world. So 1950s, most of the majority urban countries are like in you have the U.S., Canada, Greenland, parts of South Africa, no, South America, sorry, Africa majority rural, and of course the European countries like UK, um, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, and I think this is I don't know what that part is. Is that New Zealand? I'm not sure. And then, oops, I skipped a slide. 1950s, 2020. Okay, 2020, you see most of the world is majority urban. Notice that the Philippines is still rural as of 2020. This is just estimates from 2018, but they're still pretty accurate, I think. So you notice like just a few parts of the world, Africa over here, India. I think India is like mostly urban, but I could be wrong. That could be just like my consumption of news. Saudi Arabia is like mostly urban. Philippines and parts of Indonesia are left as majority rural. But the sort of the ending of this is every part like the whole world will be urbanized because that's just how human behavior and human life is going. Even with the pandemic, I think most people will say that urbanization is still a big factor that city planners and designers in general need to reckon with. Because how do we manage all these people living together and how do we make that sustainable? How do we make that comfortable? How do we make it clean, etc., etc.? So this is, I think this is needs to be updated. But the general idea of this slide is to show you how population in the group of cities called Metro Cebu. I don't think this is like officially a legal group, but I think this is just a movement. I need to be like corrected on that. I'm not super sure. Because the thing I was looking for was Metropolitan Cebu, but Metro Cebu is a different thing. So that's a big error of the slide. But anyway, these groups of cities and municipalities, they come up to about 2,800,000 people as of 2015. And this is just my projection. So by now, it's already 2021. So this would be about 3 million people if you combine all of these populations together. And you can check that with the PSA data, which is published 2020, which came out like last July, something like that. So that will be part of your activity, which I will discuss in a few minutes. I think there was a question. Is that on the chat? Question here? Any questions? No questions. Okay, let's continue. Slide. So what is urban planning? So we discussed this as an ongoing collaborative process of managing let's just say managing the city. So I added some extra functions here like physical, economic, and social. That's how I divide the different elements of a city, just like generally. But it's a process of managing the land in a city. So what is urban? What do we mean by urban? Meaning a region, a place, an area where there is more people compared to the surrounding area nearby. So I showed this graph or this table like last week. Hello, does someone have a question? Anybody have a question? Sorry, Maria, I'll just mute you, okay? If you have no question. Hello? Just making sure. Okay. So it was just the microphone. Anyway, so I didn't get to discuss this much last week, but the whole point of this table is to show you how population is a very important factor in determining if that place is urban or rural. The main idea here is that there are more people. You'll need to have more systems in place to manage the living, the working, and the recreation of those people. So if a barangay has a population of 5,000 or more, that barangay, at least in the Philippines, is considered urban. In the US, they classify urban as an area with 50,000 people or more. In Australia, they have this thing called an urban mesh block, which is a different area of measurement. If the UMB has a population or greater or equal to 45% of the total population and a dwelling density greater or equal to 45 dwellings per square kilometer. Notice, Australia has the most livable cities in Melbourne, and basically, the more detailed you study population, where people are living, how they're living, their behavior patterns, you end up with better design. So notice that the Philippines and USA definition of what urban is very general, and you can sort of compare the quality of life there. Although in the USA the quality of life is a lot better because you have like more access to malls, etc., better infrastructure. But I think more people are unhappy in like the Philippines because of their infrastructure compared to Australia. So the whole end point of this slide is the more detail you put into studying the population in your area, the better your design will be. And sort of connecting that to your design project, I think there's a question here. Okay, no problem. Uh, where did I put that thing? So if we look at Ayala Terraces again, Ayala Terraces. Connecting this to your design project, let's go to maps. Let's go to satellite. Think about the kinds of people who will be using your building. So you have a number of office spaces, a number of retail spaces, the area of your bank, and then with that you can sort of estimate how many people will be there. Like for a lobby area, you can estimate like if you have a big lobby area, you can hold 20 people at a time, or like 30 people if you add like even more areas, more square meterage. So with that, you can think about how people will go in, go out, do their activities inside your building. Is your space enough? Is it comfortable? So you have your own different kind of metrics or way of measuring how your building is used and how you develop those metrics, like how the U.S., Australia, and the Philippines like develop their metrics for urban and rural will determine how well your design functions. So this is really the whole point of this slide. So this is a very big. There's a lot of data you can get from this table over here. And then I used a zoning map of Antipolo City for this slide last year because the zoning map for Cebu City was just very low quality. But notice that the different zonings are listed here. You have low density residential, medium, and high. So you have R1, R2, R3. You have commercial C1 and C2, and you have agricultural in green, industrial in purple. So this is just a very easy way to visualize what's happening in a city. So your city could have a different map. I think Bohol has a better zoning map than Cebu. So if you're from Bohol, I think some of you are, or like the different areas. Butuan City might have better zoning map, etc., etc. And then on the subject of zoning, I'll just show you over here. Where did that thing go? This was my project in Sydney. Let me go to our zoning map. So our project was to create a residential, sort of like subdivision, but on a larger scale. And let me just show you the amount of zoning classifications there are. Where is it? Over here. And notice how much detail the Australian government and planning groups, organizations have for their zoning classifications. Cancel. How do I create a zoom? There's no magnifying glass tool. Anyway, for business and commercial uses, there are 8 types. So that's B1 to B8. And notice in our building code for the Philippines, there's only C1, C2, and C3. They have 8. That's how much detail they're looking into. Environmental, this is like our these are conservation areas in brown. There are 4 levels of that. Industrial, there are 4 levels of industrial. Residential, we have 3. They have 5. Recreation, public recreation like parks, they have 2. Primary production, rural landscape, forestry. This is like something that we don't have. I think this would be agricultural areas. They have 6 levels of that. Special activities and special infrastructures. These are categories of uses that don't fall into the ones previously mentioned. That's why they're special. This could range from very big residential projects or office buildings or any kind of mixed use development because it doesn't fall under those what they call this specific categories. And then you have natural waterways, they're mapping that. And then unzoned and deferred matter, meaning like undefined spaces. So you see very few white spaces on this map. Everything is tracked, detailed, and then saved so that everyone knows what everyone is doing. So that's really sort of the end goal of like city planners to have a complex system of information that is constantly updated, monitored, so everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And then so that should equate, or it has equated into better quality of life. If you look at studies of livability or like which cities are the most livable. And then this is what I mentioned last week. What is the difference between urban planning and urban design? So urban planning over here typically deals with the mapping. That's why it's just called planning. And then there should be a better term so there's less confusion. But currently, urban planning handles the policy making and the map making, while urban design is the implementation of planning, primarily focusing on the space between buildings. So over here, I don't think I can make it any clearer. This is a very good graphic from the urban design video on YouTube. I have it here. So if you Google Introduction to Urban Design, you should be able to find it. Space between buildings. This is public space planning and design. I know I keep saying planning a lot. It's just the act of planning happens a lot in design. So that's the main difference. Urban planning as a profession, let's just say town planning, happens in 2D, basically the maps, the policies. Urban design is the space between buildings, the streets, the public spaces, and then of course architecture is the building itself. So with architecture, if you're a good architect, you should have knowledge of urban design and urban planning, so your building fits into the existing infrastructure.